Hello friends, welcome to the next episode of DotVVM Minutes. Last time I was showing a demo of the new package we have in a BusinessPack called BusinessPack Messaging. And I believe that everybody was playing with ChatGPT right now, so I will show you how to integrate ChatGPT API, and we will be using the BusinessPack Messaging because, as you probably noticed, ChatGPT doesn't produce the entire response at once, but it produces it using some kind of streaming or something like that, so the words are appearing one by one. So I would like to implement the same thing, that as the reply is being generated, it will be appearing piece by piece. First, I will show you how the demo will look like at the end, because I have already written this application. It wasn't very difficult. So here is my chatbot. It says, "Hi there, how can DotVVM chatbot help you?" So let's ask, for example, how do I define a view model in DotVVM? And let's try this. And you will see that the response will be appearing not all at once, but it will be appearing piece by piece. Yeah. So you see, like, it's appearing slowly because it takes a couple of seconds to the model to generate the response. And I have used BusinessPack Messaging, so every time we get a new chunk of the response from the API, I immediately send it to the client using SignalR. And that's where I'm using BusinessPack Messaging, because I'm just opening a connection to the hub, and whenever I get a new piece of response, I will just append it to the response. And as you can see, there is also some kind of like formatting, because it produces, I'm expected in this scenario that it will produce some pieces of code. So that's why I'm using some kind of markdown to HTML conversion library. So I will show you how to do that also, because basically ChatGPT, it responds in markdown syntax. It's using the 3 backticks to annotate these code snippets. First thing I need to mention is that I'm not using ChatGPT directly. I'm using Azure OpenAI. So I have added Microsoft Azure OpenAI package. This one, Azure AI OpenAI. It's in preview, but it has a very nice wrapper over the ChatGPT API, so it's very easy to use. Here is just the OpenAPI client class, which I have registered in the dependency injection. So basically I'm configuring it, and you need to pass it 2 parameters. First is endpoint URL, and the second is API key. You will see both of these values in Azure Portal when you create this Azure OpenAPI resource. You need to go through some approval process. So first you will have to fill some form. They will describe your scenario. Then they will hopefully approve you and allow you to create the OpenAI resource on your subscription. So I have done this. I have got through the approval process. So now I can just register OpenAI client, and in this hub I can just request it using the dependency injection. Then when we need to interact with the API, I will explain the rest of the code in a while. But basically, there is one method you need to call, and it's called getChatCompletions. And there are 2 versions. First is just getChatCompletions, which will wait until the entire response is generated, and then it will return you the result. Or you can use this getChatCompletion streaming async, which will, as you saw already, which will return pieces of the response, and you have to build it yourselves. It is using iAsync enumerable interface, which is quite good. You can work with that quite nicely. So this NuGet package is doing a lot of the nice things for you. So this API is very easy to use. And basically you need to pass two parameters. First is model name, which is my constant here. My model is named GPT-3.5 Turbo. I'm still waiting for approval to use version 4. And then you need to pass the chat completion options. And this is a special object which basically contains the entire conversation you made with the chatbot. I'm using some kind of caching in case that I would lose the SignalR connection. So once the user will connect, it will get a unique ID. Basically this page, if it doesn't see this ID in the URL, it will generate it and redirect it. So this is my conversation ID. And I'm using concurrent dictionary. So I'm remembering just in memory. Then I will be caching the conversations there. So I have like get or create current conversation. It will look in the query string for the parameter, and it will, if the conversation exists, it will just like return it. If it doesn't exist, it will create a new one. So it creates chat completion options, and you can seed the conversation with some initial context. So it will basically explain ChatGPT how they should behave. So I have created a first message in the conversation. I added the system flag to that. It means that it's some initial context. It's not part of the conversation, but it's a thing ChatGPT should know. And then I have put some message like you are a chatbot which answers questions about .vvm framework. If you don't know the answer, point the user to the documentation at this address, .vvm.com/docs. So it should help the chatbot to deal with the situations where it doesn't have all the information, because it's trained on some like 2 years old data. There are some resources on the internet about .vvm, so it knows what it is, but of course it doesn't like know, for example, the current documentation of .vvm. That's where we would have to use some kind of model fine-tuning to get it the most recent information from our docs. Okay, so this is returning an initial conversation, and then this method, whenever a user sends a new message in the conversation, we will just add this user message into the conversation.messages, and then pass this conversation to ChatGPT so it can generate the response. And because I want to like signalize in the user interface that now we are waiting for the response to be completed, I'm like defining several methods on the client-side hub. So let's jump right now to the default page, and you can see, same as the last time, I'm using BP messaging connection, which will connect to this ChatGPT hub with this conversation ID. So I will have it in the query string, so the hub will have it available every single time. I've also named the connection as ChatGPT. You will see later when I need this, but it's just my identifier of this particular connection control. And here I have 3 message handlers. Basically, I have message started, which means that the chat is now will be sending us the chunks of its response. So in such case, I will create an empty message, because then I will be appending the chunks to that message. So whenever the message starts, I will add to my messages list an empty string. And when I receive a new chunk, then this string, I will just take the last message in the conversation and append the chunk to that. Yeah, so it will generate, like, it will add the parts. And when the message is completed, I will set user can write to true, which basically enables the button for sending the response. I don't want the user to be able to send messages while the chat is still in process of generating response. So this is some kind of flag which says that, okay, now the response is completed, so the user can add additional messages in the conversation. And here is just the repeater with the messages. I'm using some kind of CSS, so it will format the conversation like this. if it's from the user, which is every like odd message, if every even message is from the user, so it will have this message card user CSS class. Otherwise, it would have message card bot CSS class. And I have some style file which is adding the colors and the alignments, and this is done via SVG. So I'm also formatting that. And here is the markdown viewer control, which I will show you later. It basically takes the string. The messages is just a list of string. So it just takes the string and it will process it on the client side in JavaScript through the slowdown library or some, sorry, I don't know the name. Showdown, it's called, this library. So it will just pass the markdown to that library and it will return HTML. Because ChatGPT, if it uses the pieces of code, it's using the markdown syntax. And then there is just text box and button. And this is very interesting because this command is a bit more complicated. First, when the user sends the message, I will set this flag user can write to false, which means that this button will become disabled. Then I will add the user message to this messages array. And that's why I use this connection ID up here. Basically, I have the messaging connection adds me an extension to the binding system, so I can use _messaging and get connection ChatGPT, which will return me instance of this SignalR connection. And you can call this invoke async method, which allows to call a method in the SignalR hub from the client. So I will invoke the send message method, and I will pass here the string parameter. It accepts one string parameter, so I will give it current message. And then I will make the current message to be empty. So once the user does this, it will call this send message method. Yeah, so this is the wiring we have here. Once the user is connected to the hub, then I'm adding it to the the get current conversation ID. It will look in the query string and return the GUID. So I will add it to a group with the conversation ID. So if you would open 2 pages with the same ID in the URL, then it would show the same content. Yeah. But this is just to be able to distinguish to which conversation the user actually belongs. And now here I will send to the group with the conversation ID. I will send the message started. Then I will update the conversation object and ask ChatGPT for the response. And when I get the response, now I have to use streaming. ChatGPT can return you several choices. So, and in most of the cases, you are interested only in the first choice. So I need to enumerate the choices and take just the one. There is a special case if it would not return any choice. It didn't happen to me, but theoretically it can, so I'm throwing an exception. And then I'm just getting the first choice, and the choice is basically the response the chatbot can produce. And here I will be using this await for each, which can work with async enumerable, and it will give me chunks. The first and the last chunk is null. It's to signalize when the response is starting and stopping. So I'm filtering there out. I don't need to send nulls to the client. I'm only interested in chunks which actually have some content. So whenever I get chunk with some content, I will call the new message chunk on the client and put place here this string, and it will call this message handler, which will add this chunk to the latest message in the conversation. So this is doing the appending effect, like expanding the last message. And once it's finished, I will store this message from the chat in my cached conversation. It's still stored in the concurrent dictionary, so it will be there. And then I will send, if there was any issue, any exception, I will send some auto-generated message like, sorry, there was a problem calling API. And then I will say message completed. Yeah. So this is what this method does, and basically that's the entire ChatGPT hub. So I'm sending the chunks to the user, and they will be appearing in the last message. And the last thing I have here is the Markdown viewer component, and it's very simple because I'm using the Showdown JavaScript library. I'm just registering this library here in the .vvm startup. So I have downloaded it here to the lib directory in www root. So I'm using that, and I'm using also the Markdown viewer, which specifies .vvm and Showdown in its dependencies. So when the control requests this resource, it will also automatically look for load the Showdown. And it's very easy. I'm just creating a new instance of Showdown converter. I allow this smooth live preview, which generates better outputs when the Markdown isn't complete. It's mainly for like text editors where the user is editing Markdown and there are some syntax problems because the line is not finished. So it will produce better results. It works also with ChatGPT because it also sends chunks of the Markdown, so it may happen that some block is started but not completed, so it behaves a bit better. And then I'm just registering KO binding handlers, and in init I don't need to do anything because this is only like a read-only control for the user. It only displays text, but it doesn't have any interactions with the user. So in init I don't need to do anything. Just in the update I will unwrap the value of the binding, the current text which should be displayed, and I'm calling converter make HTML and making HTML from this Markdown and setting it as element inner HTML. So it's very easy, very simple to do, and it's JavaScript only, it's client side only. Then I just have a simple Markdown viewer composite control which just generates this data bind Markdown viewer and translates this text value binding which I'm passing to the control, and in on-pre-render it makes sure that this resource JavaScript file is included in the page. So this Markdown viewer is a very simple control, no no tricks, nothing like that. It's pure composite control. The only thing I am also adding is some CSS class, class card body, so it would have the frame around that element, because it renders just a normal div. So in such case, if I want to have arbitrary attributes on this element, I need to also put HTML capability as a parameter here in this getContents method, and I need to pass it to this HTML generic control. So this class attribute will be captured by this HTML capability and it will be added to this div element. Yeah. So that's basically how it works. And the last thing I need to do is to register this SignalR hub. So like in the app use endpoints, I am using this map hub, ChatGPT hub, to this URL. And in the page, I'm just setting this URL together with conversation ID, and that's it. So this is the entire demo, and I'm using messaging connection and message handler components to listen for the events from the SignalR hub from the server. So the events coming from the server are handled by these commands, and when I need to call some method in the hub on the server, I can use this new syntax underscore messaging get connection, reference this connection ID. It has to be unique. So this is the only problem here. It must be unique. And then I can call invoke async and call any method in that hub and pass it any parameters. The only important thing here, there is no type checking whatsoever. So if this method wouldn't exist, if it wouldn't have the correct number of arguments, or if you would pass different types than expected, you would get JavaScript errors, which you would see in a developer console. And sometimes it can be a little tricky to debug because we are unable to check if the signature of the method is actually correct. So this is the only issue. I hope this demo was useful to you. I'm amazed what ChatGPT can do, and I'm looking forward to play with model fine-tuning so we would have better search in our .vvm documentation. So maybe I will be talking about this in some of the next episodes of .vvm Minutes. If you have any suggestions or idea of the topics for next episodes, just let us know in the comments under the video. And of course, we will be happy to talk with you on our Gitter chat or on our Twitter. So see you next time at .vvm Minutes.